Hello, and I'm giving you another update on the situation over in Ukraine. It seems to be progressively worsening, and a rebuff to the Ukrainians. President Biden decided to heed the Russian warning and not send over the long-range missiles, which were capable of penetrating Russian airspace up to 500 kilometers. That was definitely a red line. And it looks like that scared off Biden enough where he canceled that one. And he's now sending over the MLRS, which is the multiple launch rocket systems. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on why, you're hearing a lot of hype about that, how that's going to be a big game changer. And so I'm going to come in and talk about that more, give my thoughts. Now, the lines in eastern Ukraine are literally collapsing. Okay. And you've also, as I predicted in about 2 videos ago, how mainstream media is going to do a narrative flip. Okay. And, you had the Washington Post, and now you have the New York Times. And it's also going to come, through all these mainstream media, television shows. And, I predicted this because it's quite obvious what they're going to do. One of the main reasons was because they're going to look like complete fools, sticking to the win-win-winning narrative for the last several months when it's a complete and utter disaster. So the faster they can get off the Zelensky Titanic, the better. Now keep in mind, these mainstream media, these are like cannibals. I mean, these people eat their own. And it's all about, money. And they're connected at the hip with the Democratic Mafia Party. So it's getting pretty ugly. And, even Zelensky's coming to terms with the fact that they're looking at a major defeat. Now, one of the issues for the Ukrainians, and I know a lot of armchair quarterbacks are, kind of condemning the Ukrainians for not retreating. Okay. And, I went into this in one of my other videos that one of the objectives of the Russians was to pulverize, the command and control, their logistics, fuel depots, take out, a lot of the vehicles, especially the armored fighting vehicles. And they wanted to remove the mobility of the Ukrainian army. Okay. Now, if you notice, there's some videos out there, I think these are more on the social media, so you're probably seeing them, is that you're seeing Ukrainians fleeing on foot, and you're seeing them, in farm vehicles, in the back of, compact cars. Most of their weapons had to been discarded behind. So, you got this ragtag group of fleeing Ukrainians, in confiscated vehicles. Whereas, the majority of the forces are left in these static positions at the mercy of the Russian army. They're facing surrender or death. Of course, surrender for the Ukrainians is a big decision because they face execution by their own comrades. So things are very ugly over there in the Eastern Front. Now, there are several Ukrainian areas, like in the Kherson area and the Zaporozhye area. That's where the big power plant that the Russians seized is. where you're having flipping, where you're having Ukrainian administrators and defense officials starting to flip allegiances. And the word is in the Zaporizhzhia area that this defense official is basically pledging all the Ukrainian bases and facilities over to the Russians. Okay, so what's going on right now in Ukraine, it's getting very desperate, and it's a collapse. And as I predicted in one of my other videos, just a couple ago, that we're probably looking at chaos erupting in Ukraine. You've got all the things that you need for a revolution. Now, this rebellion and revolution is not going to be like the color revolutions. This is going to be angry people, politicians trying to get the hell out of their country. Now, you've already got that. You had several, they call them deputies. I guess they're like congressmen, for the United States, They're fleeing. You've got Poroshenko, which is an ex-president and, another real corrupt character, trying to get the hell out of there. He knows what's going to happen when the Russians get a hold of him. Same with Zelensky. He's another rat that's going to leave the cage. You got a lot of the Ukrainian commanders abandoned their positions. And, if you look back at about 3 videos ago, you'll see this civilian ladies. These are the wives of the troops on the front line. They're like confronting this one colonel or so in the Ukrainian army. And they're just shredding this guy. He's probably lucky to get out of that building alive, but these ladies are out for blood. And, so the whole thing is collapsing. Now, on the civilian side, you got rampant inflation. Their supermarkets are bare. Their fuel supply is non-existent. I mean, there's these huge long lines at a gas station. And there's really not much gas, if any. Most of them are closed. So the people are going to be in a position where they don't want to be part of this whole globalist plan to plunge Ukraine, into this conflict in a long proxy war for the United States. So the United States can make a lot of money and fight to the last Ukrainian. I mean, I think that's becoming really obvious. And again, I'm an American. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a MAGA. I'm not a libtard. I don't vote. But I'm doing this because I feel for the Ukrainian people. And I see that the situation that they were forced into and the propaganda that these poor people were abused with, that this was a huge atrocity by the United States in particular. And, I would say the Biden administration directly. And, even like the Pentagon, you can say they don't have a heart in this at all. Like if you look back at other wars and so on, you always saw the Pentagon up at the front. They were enthusiastic. A lot of, military analysis and briefings, and that you could tell that they were into the war. This they are not. They don't agree with what Biden's doing. And it's because you've got this mafia-style cabal running everything. And this ties into the entire, Democrat mafia. And it's a mafia. The Republicans have kind of like their own mafia. I would say that the Democrat mafia is much more powerful than the Republican one. But they both are, and you could regard them both as very corrupt, mafia-style, intimidating organizations. They have the DOJ working for them. They have the FBI working for them. You know, if you can't figure that out by now, then I don't know. There's not much hope for you. You know, all these government agencies are basically on board doing all the dirty work. You know, this goes back to, you know, the old-fashioned mafia. I mean, you know, if you look at it, what was going on in the United States in the 50s and the 60s, this is the same thing. It's just that it's disguised under, you know, the Democrat Party. And, you know, there's so much slush funds and things going on. Look at the Clinton Foundation. It's a travesty. And the sad thing is that the American people are just sleeping through it. You know, they're just on, you know, chlorohydrate and, you know, and Ambien. You can't wake them up. So, you know, there's a fleecing operation. This is like, as the Chinese say, you know, you're watching like the destruction of democracy. You know, and, you know, I don't want to get sucked into Chinese propaganda, but they have a point here. You know, you're watching a demise of the American unipolar empire, like literally, like you're watching that in real time. It's never gone down in a crash and burn fashion like it has since, you know, look at the Afghanistan debacle. You know, all you need is that short video of the helicopter coming off the embassy. That's all you need. And this is what I call the cannibalization phase of this government, you know, failure. You know, the United States is basically finished. And I know, you know, like one thing I try to do is I try to trends, you know, forecasting. And so, I mean, you see a lot of my videos, you know, I was predicting the collapse of the Ukrainian, you know, military like weeks ago. And, you know, it's like what I try to do is I try to look at information and see where everything's going, you know, use all the clues. I'll go out on a limb and I'm going to try to make, you know, some trends forecast. You know, and based on what I see here, I see there's nothing that the West can do other than an overt act of war against Russia that will change the course of what's happening in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, Ukraine goes into chaos. You're probably looking at more or less like a revolt by political leaders in opposition, military, and the people. That's going to take Zelensky down, or put enough pressure on Zelensky. He's just going to have to basically leave office. I don't think he's going to be around much longer. You know, just the whole idea of this thug actor / puppet controlling a country, you know, is just so utterly ridiculous. And you know, I think even in the West, you know, people are seeing that. Like, look at ex-President Abe of Japan. I mean, he just ripped into Zelensky. And he's like, you know, it's amazing for Japanese to do that. So, you know, he went over some of the stuff that I'm telling you. He did some research. He looked into this guy, this, you know, meth addict, Zelensky, and he figured him out. Okay, and I think the Germans figured him out too. I think the Serbians and the Hungarians figured this guy out. And one by one, you know, a lot of these countries are going to do that. I think Imran Khan figured him out. That's a Pakistan, and he's trying to deal with, he was ousted in a coup attempt by the United States, which he claims that he has evidence of. And his country is in a revolution because they're not happy with that. He was their duly elected president. So another mess for the United States. And, you know, all these world leaders, you know, Modi of India, you know, they all kind of figured out Zelensky. Of course, the Chinese did. I'm sure the Russians just presented, his file, and they were like, "Oh, wow. Oh, okay. I see why you're going in there." And I encourage, people who somehow think that Ukraine is some kind of democracy. You've been had. I mean, you have been so snookered. And I went into this thinking that, there's got to be something here to this Ukraine thing. And I came away from it just in shock of how horrendously undemocratic and corrupt Ukraine is. And just do a little background. Give you a hint. There's a site run by a guy called John. The channel is not on YouTube. Okay? If you look for this site, you're going to find thousands and thousands of evidence of how this country, Ukraine, is run by the NZs. It tells you everything you need to know about the Azov battalion. It even shows you how children are being indoctrinated, going around doing, Hitler salutes. It's very, very sick and disturbing stuff. And when you look at how Ukraine is a dictatorship, where you had a actor puppet president installed who removed opposition parties. So only his party and the Nazi party are the parties in control. Okay? Do your research. Look at the atrocities. Murdering POWs. Staging massacres. People literally walking down the street and getting beaten to a pulp. Executions in broad daylight. Okay, does this sound like a democracy to you? You can go on and look for all these things that I'm mentioning here. And not to mention multiple launch rocket systems being used against your own civilians. Lots of evidence of that too. So, do research. I don't want you to just take my word for all of this. If you feel that Ukraine is a flourishing democracy, maybe you're seeing a lot of stuff that for somehow, I'm on a parallel universe planet and I can't see what you're seeing. But I'm just basing what I see from the facts that I get. I try to put everything together from the Ukrainian side, the Russian side, and especially I try to get, looking at international news sources. I think India is a good news source. Okay. Now I want to kind of come back to one thing here with the Biden approval of these multiple launch rocket systems. Okay. Now there's been a lot in the news about this, and they're making a real big deal out of it. It's just it's going to be some kind of game changer. Now when you look at one of these in action, you're like, whoa, and this is what the Russians have been using. This is why they get this idea that if the Ukrainians have these, it's going to make all the difference, because they're going to be able to do back to the Russians what the Russians are doing to them. Okay. Now I'm going to explain to you why that's not going to be the case. All right. Point number one, if you know what a multiple launch rocket system is, basically the firing device is a bunch of tubes. A little bit more than that, but I mean overall it's basically a bunch of tubes that hold rockets and they fire in a sequence. It's not very sophisticated. They were using these things like in the early days of World War II. In 1940s, early 40s. Okay, and they were doing the same thing. sequentially firing rockets. Some of them were up to 280 millimeters. Now, of course, they're longer range now, and they have pack a larger punch. But it's the same basic technology. So I just kind of want to go over that. Now, what is the what basically makes these things work? Lots and lots of rockets. Having the tubes doesn't do diddly. You need a lot of rockets, and they fire a lot of rockets in just a few minutes, seconds. And then you need another whole huge truckload to come up and fill them up again. You need an endless supply of big trucks packed with rockets. Literally, a convoy, if you want to keep that thing going. Now, the Russians have that, and they have special vehicles to carry these rockets. And if you watch some of their videos, you can watch them loading them up and showing you what I'm talking about. So, you can see how this kind of becomes a nothing burger. So the United States is going to send over, all these, launch tubes, the MLRS system, and they'll send over a few rockets, and they'll be able to fire a barrage. Then they're like, hey, we got a problem. We need more rockets. We need a lot of, and then there's no more rockets. You would have to have a convoy of trucks, literally, constantly flowing into Ukraine, or rail cars just packed with rockets, if you're going to have enough of these to make a difference. Now, keep in mind that, the Russians, they see everything. They have eyes and spies everywhere. They have UAVs, they have satellites. They can see all this stuff. It ain't going to get anywhere. It'll go to a warehouse, and the whole warehouse get taken out. And that's going to be a hell of an explosion. So you can see how it's not going to work. Now, going back to why they wanted the port for the wheat, remember that? This is why. Because the only way you can bring in a crap load of rockets is going to be with a ship. And you need a port that they can control. This is why they want the port. It has nothing to do with wheat. The United States doesn't give a damn about famine. So, this whole, hype about these multiple launch rocket systems is totally hype. It's just another one of these, kind of, get people's morale up about nothing, because it ain't going to make a difference. The howitzers that they gave to Ukraine have already been blown up. And Italy, it was only like a week or so ago when Italy gave their howitzers, and they're already blown up. And you can watch the videos. In fact, they're in my videos. I don't have them clearly marked, but if you look carefully, you can see there's a UAV guiding the fire to destroy them. And if you look at, of course, you can get on the Russian intel sites, and you can watch, you can see it. If you Google that and you look hard enough, you can find it. All this stuff I have, all these videos and things I have on my, you can get those if you search and look hard enough. And I encourage people to do that. I don't want everyone to just take my word for things. But, so, in conclusion, I'm just going over, what I see as trends. Is number one, you got Ukraine is going down, and there's just nothing the West can do about it other than an over attack on Russia and starting an entire conflict against NATO, which would, overshadow Ukraine. Then Number two is, the cannibalization of the Western democracies. It's just become about money. It's become every rat for themselves. The Bidens are pulling out billions. The Democrat Party's pulling out billions. I'm not kidding about the Bidens. When somebody does the forensic, analysis on all the money that the Bidens sucked out of the system, it's going to be in the billions. And the big guy's getting a huge chunk out of all these Ukrainian aid package. I mean, Zelensky already has 500 million sucked out of all these. And, so you got Pelosi, Schumer, all these characters and the heads of the Democrat Party. It's just a free-for-all. It's a fleecing. And this is, I call this the cannibalization phase, where, as long as the sheep are grazing and everything's, there's no great alarm to the American people, they're just going to get fleeced. And, you've already lost 20 trillion since January. Not to mention, that's not even including what they've taken out of the federal deficit with all these programs and Build Back Better and, pandemic relief crap, where people didn't get any of that. It was all just corrupt funds being taken away from the American people. So, this is where we're at. We're in this cannibalization phase. And all these things, you saw with, a lot of these programs in the pandemic. And you can now start to kind of maybe look back at the whole pandemic and figured out, the true motivations, what it was really all about. It starts with an M and ends with a Y. Okay, so everything now is about money in the United States, because we're not at the point where there's total chaos yet. But in Ukraine, which is my other prediction, it's beyond cannibalization. It's in the rats are fleeing for their life. And one of the head rats and, the canary in the coal mine is Poroshenko. Okay, and a lot of the deputies have already fled. So you can see things are already starting, and again, I mentioned that there's a lot of, officials that are flipping over to the Russians. They see what's going on. So it's the collapse of Ukraine, not just the military. And that's my last, my last basic, trend is that we see that. So, well, thanks for listening.